Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Saditet. We begin the 12th perek. The Mishnah teaches Tevul Yom u'mechusar Kippurim enan holkim bakodashim le'echol la'erev. If someone is at Tevul Yom, which means they were tameh earlier in the day, maybe they touched a dead mouse in the morning, and they went to the mikveh during the day, they are not completely tahor until nightfall, although they could eat maaser sheni at that point. However, they still cannot eat korbanot or terumah until nightfall. So he's a Tevul Yom during the day. Now he's a kohen, let's say, and during the day the kohanim there's people are making korbanot and they're dividing the parts that they eat, a korban chatat that they're going to divide among all the kohanim that are serving there on that day. The Tevul Yom cannot get a share, enan holkin. Now, although he cannot eat it during the day, by that night, automatically, he will be able to eat it. However, even though he can eat it at night, since right now, when they're dividing the meat of the sacrifice, he cannot eat, therefore he does not get a portion. That's Tevul Yom. Similar law regarding Mechusar Kippurim. You have a kohen who was a zav or a mesorah, and he went to the mikveh on the 7th day, and now on the 8th day he has to bring his korbanot. He cannot eat korbanot himself until he brings his korbanot. So let's say on the 8th day in the morning, the kohanim are involved in somebody else's korban chatat, and now they're dividing the meat. This guy, the Mechusar Kippurim, does not get any, even though later in the day he'll bring his korban. And after he brings his korban, midrabanan, he has to go to the mikveh again. And after that, he will be able to eat his korban. But nevertheless, right now, when they're dividing the meat, he cannot eat, and therefore he does not get a portion. Similar cases throughout the rest of the Mishnah. Onen, nogeya ve'eno makrib, ve'eno holek le'echol la'arev. If a kohen lost a close relative during the day, he is an onen. He's an onen that entire day. And if he gets buried that day, then the next day, then he won't be, and that night he won't be an onen anymore. But during the day, he is an onen. Now, just because he's onen doesn't mean he's tameh. It could be he's onen, but maybe he's not touching the body. Other people are around to deal with the body. So, as long as he's tahor, he can touch a korban, but he cannot be involved in sacrificing the korban, because he's an onen. That's the law. That's true for a regular kohen. Kohen gadol is different. Kohen gadol can offer sacrifices even when he's an onen, but a regular kohen may not. He also does not get a portion to eat at night, even though by the nighttime, if they bury during the day, then by nighttime he can eat sacrifices, but because now during the day when they're giving it out, everybody gets a piece. Since during the day he cannot eat, so he does not get a portion. Now at night, if there's another kohen who did get a portion and wants to share some of his meat with this guy who was onen during the day, that's fine. Also, same thing with the Tevul Yom or Mechusar Kippurim. They don't get a portion during the day. At night, if somebody else who has meat wants to share sacrificial meat with them, they're allowed to eat it. But that's the idea. Because they were not able to sacrifice during the day and eat during the day, therefore they cannot get a portion during the day. Ba'alei mumin, ben ba'alei mumin dobrin, ben ba'alei mumin kebu'in, cholkin ve'ochlin, avalo makrivin. If a kohen has a blemish, whether it's a blemish that will pass, it's temporary, or whether it's a permanent blemish, it doesn't matter. They can get a portion and they can eat, but they cannot offer a sacrifice because they have a blemish. As long as they have a blemish, they cannot be involved in making a sacrifice. However, they can eat. They can eat during the day, they can eat at night, and therefore, since at the time that they are giving out the portions, he could eat at that point, so he gets a portion. And we'll see, the Gemara will bring sources for all this. Here's a general rule. Kol she'eno ra'ui la'aboda, eno cholek babasar. V'chol she'en lo babasar, eno ba'orot. Anyone who cannot do this, who cannot perform the sacrifice, who cannot offer it, also does not get a portion. Now this is difficult because we just said a Ba'al Mum, he is a counterexample. He cannot work and offer the sacrifice, yet he does get a portion. So the Gemara in a couple of Dafim from now will answer this question. But for now, this is the general rule. And furthermore, anyone who does not get a portion in the flesh also will not get a portion in the hides. The hides of the animals, even the Korban Olah, you burn all the meat, but you don't burn the hide. The Kohanim get the hide, and they divide all the hides of the day between them. But if you don't get the meat, you also don't get the hide. Even though the hide is not edible, nevertheless, it goes together. Afilu tameh b'sha'at zirikat damim v'tahor b'sha'at hekter halabim eno cholek babasar. Even if a person is tameh during the time of the sprinkling of the blood, but he will be tahor at the time of burning of the fats. The burning of the fats you could do at night. So this would apply to the examples before, like a Tvul Yom, who at the time of sprinkling the blood, that's during the day, he's still tameh. He can't sprinkle the blood, but he'll be tahor at the time of the burning of the fats at night. Nevertheless, eno cholek babasar, he cannot get a portion. How do we know? She'ne'emar hamakrib et dam hashilamim ve'tached mibnei Aharon lo tihye shok hayamin lemana. Pasuk in Vayikra 7:33 says, anyone who sacrifices the blood of a peace offering and the fat from among the sons of Aharon shall have the right thigh for a portion. That means the one who sacrifices the blood of the shilamim, he can get a portion. But if he is not eligible to sacrifice because he's tameh during the sprinkling of the blood, then he does not get a portion. That's the Mishnah. Gemara asks, what's the source for this law that a kohen who cannot perform the sacrifice doesn't get a portion? Amar Resh Lakish damar kera hakohen amchate ota yochelena kohen amchate yochal sheno mechate eno ochel. This is a bit curious because the Mishnah itself brought a pasuk over here from Vayikra 7:33 that says someone, if they bring the blood, then they can eat it. Otherwise not. And now the Gemara is asking for another source, and Resh Lakish provides a different pasuk from Vayikra 6:19. Okay, the Rishonim try to explain why we need yet another pasuk. This one's a little bit different. And here it says, the priest who effects atonement shall eat it. So that means that if he's the one that's sprinkling the blood, then he can eat it. But if he's not sprinkling the blood, he cannot eat it. We ask, is that true? Uchlalahu, is that a general rule? Beha mishmara kula den mechatiin ve'ochlin. Ra'oi lechitui ka'amrina. What about the rest of the mishmara? Mishmara is the priestly watch, the rotation. Every week, a different group of kohanim, that's their turn to come and serve in the mikdash. So what about the rest of the mishmara? They all get a portion. Even though they're not actually sprinkling the blood, only one kohen sprinkles the blood. So if we would take this pasuk literally, it would be the kohen who's sprinkling the blood, he eats, sounds like, all of the meat. And that's it. He doesn't share with anybody else. So is this really a general rule? The truth is that everybody, all the kohanim in that watch, in that clan, they get to share all the meat equally. So even though they're not the ones sprinkling, they do eat. Okay, so you know what? Change our understanding of the pasuk. Not how kohen amchateh doesn't mean that if he actually is doing it. It means if he is fit. Ra'ui lechitui ka'amrinan. If he is fit to sprinkle the blood, then he can get a portion of the meat. And all the kohanim that are part of that mishmarah, they could potentially, they do a lottery, they choose, they take turns of who's going to do what, but they all potentially could offer the sacrifice, and therefore they all get a portion. Now that also is not completely true. You have a child, a minor, kohen, who is not fit to do the chitui, he's not bar mitzvah, he cannot offer the sacrifice, and yet the child kohanim are also permitted to eat. So that seems to go against the pasuk, even if you say ra'ui. Ela ma yochelena yechalekena. Oh, the word yochelena doesn't mean to eat, but rather it means to get a portion. And so actually a katan, a minor, does not get his own portion. He can eat, but only from someone else's portion, like his father. His father will get a portion, and his father can then give it out to his kids. The Kohanim can share with other Kohanim if they want, and certainly their own kids, they can share. So a katan, yes, he can eat, but you're right, a katan does not get his own portion, so now we understand. Ra'ui lechitui cholek, sheno ra'ui lechitui eno cholek. Anyone who can potentially sprinkle the blood, he gets a portion. But if he cannot sprinkle the blood, like a tvul yom, then he does not get a portion. Now we have another challenge. Hare ba'amum deno ra'ui lechitui ve'cholek. A kohen who has a blemish cannot, not even potentially, he cannot sprinkle blood because he has a blemish. Yet he does get a portion. So how do we understand the pasuk now? Ba'amum rachamanada b'yeh kol zachar ba'kohanim. There's another pasuk. There's 3 pasukim after the pasuk that we just quoted that says kol zachar, all males ba'kohanim. What does it mean, all? Who is it coming to include? Lerabot ba'amum. It includes a ba'amum, even though, you're right, he's not included in this pasuk, because this one only says a kohen who potentially can sprinkle the blood. Ba'amum cannot sprinkle the blood. But kol zachar comes to include ba'amum, that he does get a portion. Ve'ema kol zachar l'rabot tivul yom. Wait, kol zachar is not clear. Maybe you could say that kol zachar is coming to include a tivul yom. He gets a portion because at night he'll be able to eat it. No, it makes more sense that between the two, that the word kol zachar is coming to include the ba'amum, because the ba'amum can eat even during the day. At the time of the sprinkling of the blood during the day, the ba'amum could eat it during the day. So it makes more sense to include him as getting a portion rather than tivul yom, who cannot eat during the day. We challenge that. Adrabah, tivul yom havale l'rabuye de leurta michzah hazeh. Wait, a tivul yom maybe is better, and you should include him, because once the night comes, he will be a fit kohen. He'll be able to do services. He could put the meats, the leftovers onto the fire. And so he's a totally fit kohen, whereas the ba'amum, even at night, will still be a ba'amum. Hashta miha ha lachazid. No, but right now, when we're sprinkling the blood and dividing up the meat during the day, the tivul yom is not fit to be a kohen, not fit to eat. Whereas the ba'amum, at least at that time when they're giving it out, is fit to eat. Therefore, it makes more sense to include the ba'amum in the kol zachar, and he does get a portion. Another answer, Rav Yosef Amar, Mikidi may yochelena yechalekena lichtov rachamana yechalekena may yochelena. Rav Yosef is picking up on the re-understanding that we just had, that yochelena, any kohen who does the sprinkling, can eat. We reinterpret it to say not just eat it, but not can eat, but he actually gets a portion. Now, if the Torah means gets a portion, why doesn't it say get a portion? Why does it say use the language of yochelena if it means yechalekena? It must come to teach something. Shema mina ra'ui la'achila cholek she'eno ra'ui la'achila eno cholek. It teaches us that anyone who is fit to eat gets a portion. That includes a ba'amum. But someone who is not fit to eat, like a tvul yom, is not going to get a portion. So Rav Yosef understands, can explain why we include a ba'amum and not a tvul yom, based on this exact language. Ba'ed Resh Lakish asks a question. Ba'amum vehu tameh, ma'u sheyechalekulo. So a kohen who's both a ba'amum and he's also tameh. Can he get a portion? Why would we think so? Kevan de la hazi v'rachamana rabiyeh la shena mali tameh mali ba'amum. On the one hand, you could say a ba'amum is really not fit to be a kohen. He has a blemish, and yet there's a special pasuk kol zachar that comes to include him. Maybe once you have a special pasuk to include a ba'amum, you include him no matter what. And it doesn't matter whether he's tameh or whether he's a ba'amum. He's unfit either way, but now you made a special inclusion for the fact that he's a ba'amum, so maybe we ignore the fact that he happens to also be tameh, and he's included anyway, and he gets a portion. Or do we say, no, if he can eat, if he's just a ba'amum and he's tahor, then he can eat. So if he can eat, then he gets a portion. But if he cannot eat, and a ba'amum who's tameh, since he's tameh, he cannot eat, so he does not get a portion. Which way? What's the answer? Amar Rabba Tashema. He has an answer from a baraita that says, Kohen Gadol makrib onen ve'eno ochel ve'eno cholek le'echol la'ereb shema'mina ra'ui la'chila ba'inan shema'mina. A Kohen Gadol, when he's an onen, he can nevertheless make a sacrifice. Special law of Kohen Gadol. Now, even though he can perform the sacrifice, he cannot eat it as an onen. He also does not get a portion to eat that night. At night, he won't be an onen anymore, but since right now, during the day, he cannot eat, he also does not get a portion. What do we learn from this? That only someone who can eat can get a portion. But a Kohen Gadol, even though he can perform the sacrifice, but since he cannot eat right now, he does not get a portion, and so that will be true also for the Ba'amum, who is Tameh. Since he is Tameh, he cannot eat. Since he cannot eat, he does not get a portion. Ba'edav Oshaya, another similar question, and that we're going to use the same source for the answer. Tameh bekorbanot tzibur, ma'u sheyechaleku lo. What if a kohen who's tameh, who is allowed to perform sacrifices when the majority of the congregation is tameh? When most of the congregation is tameh, then the korban sibur can be offered in impurity, and even the kohen who is impure can perform it and sprinkle the blood. Now, how about that kohen? Does he get a portion of the sacrifice? Here's the two sides. Mi amrinan hamhateh amarachamana v'hainami mehatehu. The pasuk that we quoted said, any kohen who sprinkles the blood, he gets a portion. Well, he's sprinkling the blood, so therefore, makes sense he should get a portion. Or is the rule, if he can eat, then he gets a portion. If he cannot eat, then he does not get a portion. Okay, good question. Amar Ravina Tashema. Kohen Gadol makriv onen ve'eno ochel ve'eno cholek le'echol la'ereb. Shema'mina ra'ui la'achila ba'inan shema'mina. We use the same source. So Kohen Gadol, he can offer a sacrifice even when he's onen, although he does not eat it when he's onen, and the Baraita teaches that he does not get a portion to eat that night. What we learn from here is that it doesn't matter that he's mechateh, because Kohen Gadol also is mechateh, but he cannot eat. There, he has to be able to eat. If he can eat, he gets a portion. If he cannot eat, he does not get a portion. And therefore, the kohen who's doing korban sibur betumah, although he's allowed to sprinkle the blood, since he cannot eat, he does not get a portion. We now move on to the next part of the Mishnah that says, Onen nogeya ve'eno makriv. And onen, someone who lost a close relative on that same day, and he's a kohen, and he's serving in the Bet HaMikdash, he is allowed to touch korbanot, but he cannot sacrifice korbanot, and the rest of it says he does not get a portion. So from biblical law, an onen cannot eat sacrificial meat. This is independent of the question of whether he's actually tameh lamet or not. If he's actually tameh lamet, he went and touched the body, and he's permitted as a regular kohen, if it's his father or mother, he's permitted to go and bury the body and touch the body and be in the same room. If he does, then he's tameh lamet, and then he has to wait and get sprinkled on the third day and the seventh day, and then go to the mikveh. So that's a whole separate situation. We're talking about a kohen who is an onen, who did not go and touch the body. So even though he's tahor, we're going to discuss in the Gemara, was he very careful not to become tameh? Was he not so careful? Okay, but he didn't for sure go and become tameh. So we're assuming he's generally tahor. Nevertheless, this is a special law. An onen is not allowed to eat sacrificial meat, and therefore does not get a portion. Also, he is not allowed to serve. Even if he's totally tahor, he cannot offer a sacrifice. According to the Mishnah, the only thing that he can do is touch a sacrifice. Since he is tahor, so what? So he touches the sacrifice. There's no tumah there. Now we ask about that. Onen nogeya urminhi. Onen umchusar kippurim sirichin tevila lakodesh. How could this be? We have a Mishnah Masechet Chagiga that says, Onen, that's our case, and also Mechusar Kippurim, a Zav, a Mesorah, who on the 8th day did not yet bring their korbanot, they have to go to the mikveh first before eating or touching. It doesn't say eating or touching, so we're assuming it means anything, a sacrificial meat. So Mechusar Kippurim, we understand. He went to the mikveh on the 7th day, and then he goes and brings his korbanot on the 8th day. Midoraita, then he could eat kodashim after. But the rabbis say, you know what? Go to the mikveh again. Okay, so he has to go to the mikveh again. And onen, he is onen midoraita, that whole day that he lost his father or mother or brother or sister or child. And that day is onen, so he can't do anything. At the end of the day, at night, he goes to the mikveh, and then he can go and eat kodashim. But he has to go to the mikveh first. It's not because he is tameh, technically, he's tahor. Nevertheless, he has to go to the mikveh first. This is a special rule regarding an onen. But here, it sounds like he is not allowed to touch it before he goes to the mikveh, and that would be at night, we think. However, the Mishnah says that he can touch it. Even during the day, he can go and touch it. So what's going on? Amar Rabbi Ameh, Amar Rabbi Yochanan lakashya, kan beshe tabal, kan beshe lo tabal. Rabbi Ameh says the name of Rabbi Yochanan, there's no problem here. Our Mishnah is talking about where he indeed went to the mikveh. He went to the mikveh, let's say, during the day. Okay, so he went to mikveh during the day, so now he can't eat sacrificial meat yet, because that's a deoraita law. All day long he cannot eat it. But if he went to the mikveh, then he can touch it. There's no problem of touching it. And the Mishnah in Masechet Chagiga is talking about where he did not go to the mikveh during the day. So he cannot do anything, he cannot eat it or touch it. And that's what it says. Srichin tevilah la kodesh. You have to do tevilah for kodesh. By the way, the end of the Mishnah says avalo letiruma. For teruma, this is not the law. That's going to come up in a second. That teruma, he does not need to do tevilah for teruma. Onen muchsar kippurim. As soon as the night comes, that's it. They can eat teruma. Vechi taval mai haveh. Now we ask, and even if he did go to the mikveh during the day, while he's on there and he went to the mikveh, this makes sense for Mechusar Kippurim, because that's okay. As long as he brought his korban and goes to the mikveh, then he's good, even during the day. But for an onen, even if he goes to the mikveh during the day while he's onen, hahadra ale aninut. The aninut will come right back. The second he comes out of the mikveh, he's still onen, it's still during the day. So how is going to the mikveh going to help him? Rather, he has to wait till nighttime, go to the mikveh at night, and then he can both touch and eat. Damar Rabba bar Rab Huna, onen shetaval aninut chozeret alav. And we know that this is the law because Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, said that if an onen goes to the mikveh, then the aninut comes right back to him. And so, question back against our Mishnah that says onen nogeya, how could he touch it? So, he went to the mikveh during the day. He's still an onen. He still should not be able to touch it, according to the Mishnah in Masechet Chagiga. So we have a new answer, la kashya. Ha da asach da'ateh, ha de la asach da'ateh. The Mishnah Chagiga that says he cannot eat or touch the korban as an onen, that's where he got distracted. He was not being careful to stay away from tumah. You weren't careful to stay away from tumah, now you can't eat it and you can't touch it. Whereas our Mishnah here in Masechet Zevaḥim is where he went to the mikveh and he's concentrating and making sure not to become tameh. Okay, you made sure not to become tameh, then you can eat it. You can touch it. You still can't eat it because you are still an onen. So that's a fundamental doraita law. But the touching it, as long as you're careful that you're not tameh, okay, no problem of touching it. We ask, Hesech hadat shelishi ushvi ba'eh. Wait a second. If in the Mishnah Chagiga you said he wasn't being careful, he was distracted. If he's distracted and not careful about touching tum'ah, well then we have to suspect that he touched a dead body, and he would require to wait to get sprinkled with paraduma on the 3rd and 7th day. Damar Rabbi Yustai, Rabbi Matun, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hesech hadat tzarich hazaa shelishi u'shbi'i. Rabbi Yochanan says that not all, of course, if you know for sure you touched a dead body or you were in the same room as a dead body, then for sure you need the whole process. Rabbi Yochanan is saying, even if you were just not careful, and so you're walking around, you're going in, you're going out, you're walking through cemeteries, if you're not being cognizant and careful, then you have to assume that it's likely that you came into contact with a dead body or went into a room, and therefore you have to get sprinkled with paraduma water on the third and seventh day. So that's a challenge now against our interpretation of Masechet Chagiga, that we said, how come you can't touch it? Because you went to the mikveh, but then you weren't careful. If you weren't careful, then just going to the mikveh, again, you go to mikveh at night. Now you could touch it. Why? You should require the whole paraduma ceremony. And the answer is la kashya. Hada asach da'ateh mittemeh met, hada asach da'ateh mittemeh sheretz. The statement of Rabbi Yochanan is talking about a case where he diverted his attention totally, even from becoming tameh lamet. Someone is a kohen or anybody who is going through his day and not being careful to be not tameh lamet. So then we have to assume he's tameh lamet, and so that's why everybody would have to, before Pesach, anyone who wanted korban Pesach, they have to do paraduma, even if they don't remember specifically being at a cemetery. Everybody has to, and kohanim, since they're involved in kodashim regularly, so they would have to be careful all the time. Keep in mind, tameh met, I have to make sure to go here, not go there. So if anyone is not careful from being tameh lamet, they have to go do the whole ceremony on the third and seventh day. That's what Rabbi Yochanan was talking about. But our Mishnah, Masechet Chagiga, is talking about where asachtate mitmet sheretz, where he had in mind, I'm not going to make sure not to become tameh lamet. That he has in mind. He just did not keep in mind that he should stay away from sheretz, from dead creepy crawlies. That he did not have in mind, and therefore we have to worry maybe he did come into contact with a dead sheretz, in which case he would have to go to the mikveh. And that's why we make him go to the mikveh in order to touch it. Our Mishnah here in Masechet Zevaḥim is where he went to the mikveh and he was careful, 100% careful regarding all tumah. Mishnah Chagiga is where he went to the mikveh, but he was not careful regarding sheretz, so therefore it's no good. He has to go to the mikveh again at night after the aninut is finished. Tameh sheretz tameh me'aliyahu ha'areb shemesh ba'eh. And now we ask, if he was not careful regarding tumat sheretz is a deoraita, full-fledged tum'ah, and you cannot become tahor and eat terumah or kodashim until it gets dark. You have to go to the mikveh first during the day and also wait till it gets dark. So if he was actually had hesech hadat from regarding tumat sheretz, then you have to assume that he did touch a sheretz. And in that case, even if he went to the mikveh during the day, he still would not be able to eat or even touch any kodashim. And so this distinction that we made in our Mishnayot that said in Masechet Chagiga, you can't touch it. You know why I can't touch it? Because he was not careful regarding a sheretz, and then he went to the mikveh. But if he was careful and he went to the mikveh, then he can touch it, because that's what our Mishnah in Zevaḥim says. Yeah, but that's not true. If he was not careful regarding tum'ah of sheretz, then he has to wait till nighttime, no matter what. That's one. Ve'od afilu terumah, and furthermore, in the Mishnah Chagiga, I mentioned that the end of the Mishnah goes on and says, "Ve'eronen mechusa kippurim sirichin tevila lakodesh." Avalo letruma. Regarding teruma, they do not have to go to the mikveh. They can go ahead and they can touch teruma. Well, is that true? If they were not careful regarding tumat sheretz, then they should not be able to. He should not be able to touch teruma. So this doesn't make sense. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah beomer nishmarti midabar hamtameeni velo nishmarti midabar haposleni. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, the Mishnah is talking about a case of someone who says, I will be careful regarding something that makes me tameh, but not something that makes me pasul. The difference between those is, if he's careful to make sure that he won't be a sheni letumah. As long as he's not a sheni letumah, he cannot make terumah pasul. Terumah becomes tameh if it touches a sheni, it can become a shelishi. However, terumah cannot become a revi'i. On the other hand, kodashim can even become a revi'i, meaning if a shelishi touches kodashim, then it becomes a revi'i. So this guy, this onen, he said, I'm going to make sure he's not going to touch a sheretz itself, because then that will make him tameh and be able to make tameh also terumah and kodashim. So he's careful not to do anything like that. Any deoraita tumah he's going to stay away from. But from dirabanan tumah, that would make him a sheni, he's not going to do that, and therefore, at most, he'll be a shelishi. Even if he is a shelishi and touches terumah, it's okay, there's no problem of touching terumah as a shelishi. He's not going to make the terumah tameh. And that's why the Mishan Chagiga said, for terumah, that's okay, he can touch terumah all day. However, he wasn't careful to regarding a shilishi. He could become a shilishi, and therefore he cannot touch a revi'i, because that he's not careful about. Umi ika netiruta lepalga. Now we ask, can you have such a thing that someone will be careful regarding half a matter, that he's going to say, I'm careful not to go to a certain level, but after that, I'm not careful. Either you're careful with tumah or you're not careful. Where do we see a case where someone is only partially careful, and that's a legitimate thing? In v'hatanya odehu hasal al rosho u'magrefa betocho ve'amar libi al hasal ve'en libi al hamagrefa hasal tahor v'hamagrefa teme'ah. We have a braita that teaches if someone has a basket, he has a basket of figs on his head, and there's a shovel or a rake that's inside that used to shovel the figs. And he says, I'm going to have in mind regarding the basket, I don't want the basket to become tameh. But I'm not having anything in mind regarding the shovel. I'm not going to be careful about that. In that case, it works. What he said, the sal, since he's careful about the sal, he's going to go make sure that when he's walking, it won't touch anything that's tameh. The sal therefore remains tahor. Oh, but the shovel, since he didn't have it in mind, wasn't careful regarding it, then the shovel is tameh. We ask, v'ti'ut tameh magrefa lasal, but the shovel is in the basket. So if it's in the basket, then and the shovel is tameh, won't it make the basket tameh as well? And keli metameh keli, and the answer is no. A vessel cannot make another vessel tameh. Unless it's an avatuma and it touches a vessel, then it can make the vessel rishon tumah. But below that, a vessel can only transfer tumah to food. A sheni if it's chulin, shelishi if it's terumah, revi'i if it's sacrificial meat. And so the vessel, the shovel, is not going to make the basket tameh. We're not talking about an avatuma situation. So it's a lower level tumah, therefore you don't have to worry about that. Okay, but the shovel, isn't it touching the figs? And therefore the figs can become tameh because he was careful about the basket and about the contents of the basket. Fine. The basket and the figs are tahor. But the shovel he wasn't, so the shovel is tameh. So how come the shovel doesn't make the figs tameh? Amar Rava be'omer shemartia midavar hametamea velo shemartia midavar haposla. Rava says, we're talking about a case where the guy who has a basket on his head said, I'm going to make sure that the shovel will not become tameh to the level that it could make other things tameh, but he was not careful to make sure that it did not become tameh itself. In other words, he was careful to make sure that the shovel would not become a sheni l'tumah, because if it was a rishon or sheni l'tumah, it could make cholin or terumah tameh. So that he was careful. What was he not careful of? He wasn't careful that the shovel shouldn't become a shelishi l'tumah. So the shovel may very well be a shelishi l'tumah that could make sacrificial meat tameh. So that's what it means here. V'hamagrefa time'ah. It only means that it's tameh enough to make kodashim pasul, but not the figs. The figs, whether they're chulin or terumah, the figs are okay. That's why. What you see here is that Rava, in order to resolve this, did make a distinction even between these subtle levels that someone can have in mind. Yeah, have in mind it won't be a sheni l'tumah, but it might be a shelishi l'tumah. So since we have that as a precedent, so we can accept that as the answer above as well. Now, all that was to resolve the contradiction between the Mishnah in Chagigah and the Mishnah here in Zevaḥim. But now we're going to have a new answer, which is going to be simpler. Igalgal milatau metai lekamed Rabbi Abba bar Memal. So this discussion was repeated, circulated, and came before the Abba bar Memal. Amar lehu. La shemi'a lehu hadamar Rabbi Yochanan amar Rabbi. Oh, the people that were the sages who were discussing this, evidently did not hear the tradition of Rabbi Yochanan, who said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Ha'ochel shelishi shel teruma asur lechol umutar liga. Someone who eats shelishi of teruma, someone who eats teruma that has third degree impurity. A Kohen is not allowed to eat it because it's tameh. But it's a low-level tumah, and so when he eats it, the person who eats it himself becomes tameh to the third degree. And that person, he cannot eat, but he can touch terumah. So you see that there is a distinction between eating and touching. Alma ba'achila avud rabbanan ma'ala, benigi'ah la avud rabbanan ma'ala. What we see from here is that when the rabbis make a stringency, they want to make an extra high-level stringency, they do so regarding eating, but not regarding touching. If it was a Doraita law, then you're right. Okay, that's across the board. But a Rabbanan, extra stringency applies to eating, but not to touching. And therefore, we can now give a new reconciliation of the Mishnah here in Zevaḥim and the one in Chagigah. The Mishnah in Zevaḥim says an onen can touch it, but cannot eat it. And that's talking about before he goes to the mikveh. The Mishnah in Chagigah said he has to make sure to go to the mikveh for kodashim. Remember, the Mishnah in Chagigah did not explicitly say eating or touching, but we should have assumed, if we knew this tradition, we would have known that the Mishnah in Chagigah is only talking about eating. And the point is that someone is an onen. During the day, they cannot eat kodashim mideoraita. In fact, they can't even eat meat. So that's during the day. Now, when it comes when the nighttime comes, they're not an onen anymore. Let's assume they buried their loved one during the day. If not, then they'd be onen midrabanan, even to the next day. But if they buried during the day and now the nighttime comes, midoraita, they're no longer an onen. The rabbis came and made a stringency to say, you know what? Go to the mikveh again. Not because they're tameh. If they actually were tameh, they had hesech dat, or they actually touched something, then they have to go through the regular tahara process. But if they didn't, then we have a ma'ala, an extra stringency, go to the mikveh. Before they go to the mikveh, they can touch, but they cannot eat, because that's the basic law. And therefore, our Mishnah is talking about touching. Yes, you're allowed to touch it even before you go to the mikveh. And the Mishnah in Chagigah also assumes that you can touch it even before you go to the mikveh, but you cannot eat it until after you go to the mikveh. And so you see, this is a simple way of resolving the Mishnah in Zevaḥim and the Mishnah in Chagigah. The Mishnah continues, Ve'eno holek le'echol vechule. The onen does not get a portion in the sacrifice during the day because he cannot eat during the day. Now the Gemara is going to infer a leniency from this. Miflagu de la palig vechi mezameni le'achil. The Mishnah only means that during the day he cannot eat and therefore he does not get a portion. However, even though he does not get a portion, if someone else would invite him that night to join him and share some of his korban, then the onen can eat the korban. So he cannot eat during the day and does not get a portion. But at night, although he will not have a portion on his own, if his friend says, here, come, join me, have some korban, an onen can eat that night. Urminhi, onen tobel ve'ochel et pisho la'areb, avalo ba'kodashim. This contradicts a Mishnah Masechet Pesachim. Mishnah there does not have these words in Chosai Kippurim, that's why it's in parentheses here. And there it says that an onen can do tevilah at night and then eat korban Pesach, although he cannot eat other korbanot. And so this is a contradiction, because here they're in agreement that you can eat korban Pesach, but not other korbanot. Our Mishnah said that he can eat other korbanot. He doesn't get a portion, but if someone shares it, he can eat it. So our Mishnah in Zevaḥim is lenient. The Mishnah in Pesachim is stringent. Now, why does the Mishnah in Pesachim make a distinction between Kodashim and Pesach? The reason is because Korban Pesach, if you don't partake of Korban Pesach when you can, then you're liable to karet. Now, the prohibition at night, we're going to see in a second, is only mid-Rabbanan. And onen during the day cannot eat meat, deoraita. But at night, it's only a problem mid-Rabbanan. So for other korbanot, we say Rabbanan, you can't have korbanot. But mid-deorait, since it's only Rabbanan, when it comes to Korban Pesach, which is karet, there the Korban Pesach overrides. Nevertheless, we still have a contradiction. Mishnah Pesachim says no, other sacrifices. Our Mishnah says he can eat other sacrifices. There's no Rabbanan about that. Amar Rav Yirmiyah midifti la kashya kan bePesach kan b'shar yemot hashana. Rav Yirmiyah midifti says there's no problem. Our Mishnah is talking about on Pesach, where since you're allowed to eat Korban Pesach, so then it says, okay, once you're allowed to eat one Korban, we allow other Korbanot also. Whereas the Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim, strangely enough, you think Mishnah Pesachim is talking about Pesach. No, that part of the Mishnah, Aval lo b'kodashim, is talking about other days of the year, not Pesach. And we explain, Pesach, I did achil Pesach, achil nami kodashim. On Pesach itself, since you're allowed to eat Korban Pesach, because that's karet, so that's going to override the Drabanan of onen at night. So then you can eat other kodashim also. That's our Mishnah and Zevaḥim here is talking only about Pesach night. That's quite an okimta. That our entire Mishnah in Masechet Zevaḥim is only talking about Pesach night. B'shadi mot hashana de lahazi, but in the other nights of the year, since there's no permission to eat Korban Pesach, so then there's no permission given to any. Umay aval lo b'kodashim shel kol hashana. Then you have to read the Mishnah Pesachim as saying the onen he can do tevilah, then he can eat Pesach on Pesach, and on Pesach actually he could eat other korbanot also. Kama. However, during the rest of the year, he cannot eat kodashim, which is also quite a difficult way of parsing that Mishnah. But that's the first answer of Rav Yirmiyah midifti. Rav Aseh Amar, he says a different answer. La kashya, kan shemet lomet be'arba'a asar ukvaro be'arba'a asar. Kan shemet lomet b'shlosha asar ukvaro be'arba'a asar. Yom Kippurah la tafis lelo midrabanan. Rav Aseh explains, the Mishnah in Pesachim, which is stringent, is talking about a case where the person had a relative died on the 14th, and he buried on the 14th, and therefore, since this is the night after the biblical aninut, the biblical aninut is the day of death. So now, since he's buried, okay, that's done, but that night is going to be Dirabanan aninut. Since it's Dirabanan, he cannot eat other kodashim, but he can eat Korban Pesach. That's what that Mishnah is talking about. Whereas our Mishnah, Masechet Zevaḥim, that permits nighttime for eating any korbanot, that's a person who had a loved one who died on the 13th, and he was buried on the 14th. Now, if he died on the 13th and was buried on the 13th, that's it. Aninut would continue that night midrabanan. On the 14th, it would not be onen at all. Then he could bring any korban. But because they didn't bury on the 13th, but rather on the 14th, there's aninut midrabanan, continues to the 14th. However, aninut d'Rabbanan on the day of the 14th does not continue into the night of the 14th. The night of the 14th for that guy is completely permitted. And that's what our Mishnah in Masechet Zevaḥim is talking about. That explains the contradiction. Now we ask, Man tana aninut laila midrabanan? Who says that the aninut at night of the 14th would be the Rabbanan? In other words, if someone died on the 14th and was buried on the 14th, so now aninut deoraita is on the 14th, and then that night is only midrabanan. In other words, who is the author of the Mishnah Masechet Pesachim that says it's only Rabbanan? So therefore, you can't eat other kodashim, but you can eat Korban Pesach, because Pesach, which involves karet, is more stringent and overrides the Rabbanan. So who is the author of the Mishnah Pesachim? Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Tanya. Aninut laila midibre Torah. Dibre Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon omer onen eno midibre Torah ela midibre sofrim. Braita teaches that aninut of the night after a relative dies is deoraita, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's only midirabanan. Teda, share amru, onen tobel vochel pischol ha'erev v'alo b'kodashim. And the Baraita The Midrash Halacha, in fact, quotes the Mishnah Pesachim as proof and says, after all, an onen can go to the mikveh and then he can eat the korban pesach at night, but not other korbanot, because it's a prohibition mideoraita. But yes, pesach because that's special, it's karet. V'sabar Rabbi Shimon aninut laila midrabanan. Now we bring a contradiction. Is that true that Rabbi Shimon thinks that aninut at night is only midrabanan? V'hatanya Rabbi Shimon omer onen eno mishaleach korbenotav ma'alav afilu bepesach. Braita says, according to Rabbi Shimon, an onen cannot send his korbanot during the day because he's still going to be onen at night. And so doesn't that include Korban Pesach? It doesn't make any distinction here, which means you cannot join in a Korban Pesach, and because you cannot eat even a Korban Pesach at night. That would agree with Rabbi Yehuda, that aninut at night is deoraita. We answer, la lebarmi Pesach. When Rabbi Shimon says onen cannot send any korbanot, it means other korbanot. But Pesach, he can send during the day because he will be able to eat it at night, since at night is only the Rabbanan. Another challenge, V'hatanya Rabbi Shimon omer, shelamim keshu shalem mebi, ve'eno mebi keshu onen. There's a long baraita, it's all attributed to Rabbi Shimon. And it says a korban shelamim is called a korban shelamim because a person can only bring a korban shelamim when he is shalem, and not when he's in onen. He has to be full, complete, in proper mindset, and not if he's in this acute state of mourning. So no shelamim offering when you're onen. Minayin l'rabot et hatodah, marbe ani et hatodah shekenechet b'simcha kishlamim. How do I know that the todah also an onen cannot bring? Because I'm going to include that since it's eaten in happiness as a shalamim. Shalamim, peace offering, is done in happiness, so to a todah. Minayin l'rabot et ha'olah, marbe ani et ha'olah sheken ba'a b'neder midabak kishlamim. It includes also an olah. An onen cannot bring it because korban olah is similar in that it can be brought as a voluntary offering or a vow, just like shelamim. This is why we brought this whole b'raita. How do I know that? That includes the firstborn, a maaser animal, and korban pesach also cannot be brought by an onen. Well, I'm going to bring those into this halacha because they do not come for a sin, just like shelamim is not brought for a sin, so to these three are not brought for a sin. Minayin rabot chatat ve'hasham tamod omar zebach. And how do I know that also chatat ve'hasham, which are brought for sin, cannot be brought by someone who's an onen? He has to wait. He has to start to bring a chatat if he made a sin, but he can wait till the afterwards. Because it says the word zebach, and that comes to include other types of korbanot, even not shelamim. Minayin rabot ha'afot ve'menachot ve'hayayin ve'hasim ve'halebonam t'madomah shelamim korbano. And how do I know that also an onen cannot bring bird offerings, meal offerings, wine libations, wood offerings, frankincense, because it says the word korbano after shelamim, and that comes to include other things. Kol korbanot shu mebi keshu shalem mebi ve'eno mebi keshu onen. And therefore, all korbanot that this person brings, he can only bring when he is full, meaning, and not when he is onen. Okay, why do we bring all this? Because katan emiha pesach, it says korban pesach cannot be brought by an onen, according to the Rabbi Shimon. But Rabbi Shimon right before said, the other statement said that Rabbi Shimon thinks that the onen the nighttime after aninut is only the Rabbanan. And since it's only the Rabbanan, an onen can bring a korban pesach during the day, because even though during the day he's onen, but at night his aninut will only be the Rabbanan, and Pesach overrides, so he can bring it. And this baraita says he cannot bring it. This is a straight out contradiction. Amar Rav Chisda, Pesach kedin asbeh. Surprising answer. Rav Chisda says, Pesach was brought, by the way, over here, just because it's a usual grouping, Bechor Maaser Pesach, but actually Pesach doesn't belong here. Rabbi Shimon does not think this is the law for Pesach. Pesach you can bring, and here it was just brought in as, because when you memorize it, you say, Bechor Maaseru Pesach, but actually, it serves no purpose here, and it actually does not belong here. That's one answer. Rav Sheshat Amar, my Pesach, Shalmei Pesach. Rav Sheshat says the word Pesach in this braita. So Pesach actually refers to the shelamim that are brought with Pesach. We call that Korban Hagigah. You bring Korban Hagigah, so they eat that. You have a lot of people, and you need more meat. So you eat the Korban Hagigah, and then you eat the Korban Pesach. So you're not eating the Korban Pesach when you're ravenous. So that's talking about Shalmei Pesach. Those are Shalamim, so you don't bring those. However, Pesach itself you do bring. Ihachi, Hainu Shalamim. Wait a second, why do you have to tell me Shalmei Pesach? You already told me that Shalamim are not brought by Nonen, and Shalmei Pesach is a type of Shalamim, so I already know that. No, Tena Shalamim Mabin Mechamat Pesach, Tena Shalamim Mabin Mechamat Asman. The Braita wanted to take the trouble to teach you that Shalamim that come because of Pesach, Onen cannot bring, and also shalamim that are brought by their own account, also Onen cannot bring, and you need both. Ti'i la tena shalamim habayim mechamat pesach sakada tachamina ho'il mechamat pesach ate ki gufeh de pesach dameh kamash malan. Because I might have thought that the shalamim that are brought because of Pesach, since they come because of Pesach, and the korban Pesach I'm allowed to bring, so I might think, well, if I can bring korban Pesach, I have to bring these other shalmei todah. These other shalamim, shalmei Pesach, like the korban chagiga, I might think it's needed for Pesach, so therefore maybe it's allowed also, and that's why the Braita goes out of its way to say Pesach, which means shalmei Pesach, are not allowed, and that is a second way of resolving the two statements of Rabbi Shimon, and on next daf we'll see other ways of resolving this contradiction. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.